I recently picked up some blank Fallout miniatures and was able to capture myself painting almost all of them. And I wanted to show off the process, so let's get into the workshop and start painting, because today I'm going to be working on a T45 power armor. I wanted to base this one off of the Hot Rod Red paint job. It's got some nice tones, little details, and shout out to Marco for giving me the idea. I began by painting the entire miniature in a black base coat. What this does is create instant shadows and also can help me hide mistakes when I begin adding other colors. Unfortunately, I hadn't noticed that I wasn't recording, but here's a look at what I was able to do. Thankfully, I was able to capture what it looked like before I added any details. Next, I'm going to be using this silver, or lead belcher. It's kind of a darker silver. And what I'm doing is keeping the brush somewhat dry. What this does is it uses the black base coat that I began with. When you lightly apply pressure from the silver, what it does is it skips over things like little bumps. I lightly brush over his feet so that it skips over little crevices and cracks, which creates again instant shadows, as well as gives a line of detail that would seem very difficult to achieve if I were to try the opposite way, where I painted this thing all silver at first and then started trying to paint in between the lines of these little dots and cracks. It looks like he's wearing some sort of gloves. I also make sure to check every little spot and corner, which means painting with a very thin brush on just the very tops of his kneecaps. Next, I'm going to use an even tinier brush from this brush set I got. I'm going to start doing the detail work on his helmet. He's got a little headlamp, breathing apparatus, and a bunch of little dots just all over the helmet. The tough part was getting under his eyelids. It's like putting on his mascara or something. Now it's a pretty zoomed in shot, but it's so funny how up close you can see every little flaw. The same red paint I used to paint him, I'm going to add just a hint of black. So I scoop it, and that's what these things are great for, is using the lid. So I'm going to add a little bit of black, mix them all up, and get a nice darker tone. I'm trying to get it pretty dark, because when I noticed in the reference picture, it's a two-toned armor. The flames themselves aren't actually black. I even started pretty dark and made an even darker mix for the flames. What I'm going to do is I take the darkest red, which is the mostly black version of the red, and I start painting the very edges of everywhere that I know I'm going to be putting flames or a color. Once the brush is just about out of paint, you start smearing it downwards. And what that does is creates a really cool little faded look to each of these lines that I was drawing. And here's a little showcase of what that looks like. Then I'm going to apply this same technique to his shoulder pads. It starts with a darker red and then sort of transitions into flames once it gets on his upper shoulder. So, same thing, paint a thin line of black and smear it up. I use this on his legs as well as his shoulders. his wrists. Paint the line where you're going to be putting it, and then drag it across. Something I learned too was start with the biggest thing first and work your way down. I felt like I was doing surgery trying to paint red around that silver, but as Bob Ross always puts it, there's no such thing as mistakes, there's just happy accidents. So if you do mess up, you can always get more silver paint right over those details again. This dark red, I do essentially the same process. I begin with the red I'm going to use, and then start smearing it upwards. And I can't stress how important it is that I don't mess this up.
So, what did the train cops do wrong?
I wanted to showcase that mistakes do happen. Thankfully, this one didn't cost me as much, but it did remind me of how careful you gotta be when you're painting. That could have been so bad if he just fell right into the red paint. I got very lucky with that. Would have made me instantly quit. I would not have finished this guy. So I apply the same technique up to both sides, both legs, front and back. And as you can see in this picture here, that's what I'm going for, red up and down. But now it's time to work on those flams. So all those base colors I started putting in, I'm gonna use the exact same color and start pulling it up in these little streaks here. I'm being incredibly light with my pressure so that it only uses just a few hairs of the brush to get a really nice thin flame look. Here's a little close-up of it on his wrists, his chest. I start applying it to each wrist. Some of them turning out better than others, and what you can always do too is if it's a little too thick, use your original red paint and start chipping away at the thick lines. As you can see, I needed to clean him up a little bit, but from a distance, he's looking pretty good so far. Lastly, I'm going to be working on his weapon, which is a plasma gun. It has many different colors on it. I'm going to use a baseline of silver, paint some yellow over it, as well as get a nice little green dot going. So just like earlier, the dry brush technique is such a lifesaver. What you do is you had this weapon painted all black, and you take some silver paint, you thin it out before you even put it on there on a napkin or off to the side on my little paint dish, and you start going in broad strokes over the entire weapon so that it skips over the little vents, the cracks. This one here, I'm going to start painting the yellow canisters, both on the front and the back. Put this really fun texture of mix of paint and dirt, and it clods up and it looks really genuine for the look I'm going for. Although I did want to paint the base of it black. Dry grass brushes that they use for a lot of diorama kits. Here's a look at the final result. Now, one of the main reasons I made this channel in the first place was to show my process for doing things. Now I'm still learning how to paint. I'm by no means a beginner. I'm nowhere near an expert, but I am trying to better my skill. You learn by doing, and you learn from your mistakes. I wanted to highlight some of the things I'm going to work on to get better. One of which was I'm going to invest in getting a little clip or a handle for these because I am just too clumsy to be working on such tiny little details. But I am pretty proud of how it turned out. Thanks for watching. See you next time.